My name is Jamie King. I'm the Director of Teacher Training at International House Dubai. We run a number of training programs, Cambridge, non-Cambridge, International House programs as well, online, face-to-face, and so on and so forth. First of all, I just need a few showings of hands to get an idea of who I'm pitching to. So first of all, how many of you are involved in the observation of teachers? Right, good, so basically everyone. Okay, how many of you consider yourself new to observing teachers? All right, good. And how many of you are, say, Cambridge teacher trainers, so CELTA, for example? Yeah. And do we have any Delta trainers? Yeah. Distance Delta is Delta 2, that's right. Don't be afraid of putting your hand up. Okay. All right, good. So I'm a CELTA and Delta tutor and assessor, and one of the things, I mean, this session is pitched primarily at those who may be new to observing in-service teachers, or to those who may not be an accredited teacher trainer. The observation that we do of in-service teachers is quite different to the type of observation we do with teachers either on a training course or on a development course. So we're going to be exploring some ideas to how to manage that process a bit more effectively. So, got my little thing here. All right, why do we observe in-service teachers? So, forgive me for stating what may be obvious to a lot of you, but obviously, teachers' own professional development. You'll see I've cross-referenced everything here with various points from the IH Standards Charter. You know, there we go. Some of you will be more or less familiar with the Charter. Okay, it's not the most interesting piece of reading in the world. I wouldn't take it to bed with you at night, but just in case you're not familiar with it at all, these are all the points where in-service observation is mentioned in the Charter. So, anyway, teachers' own professional development, that's kind of obvious. Improve quality of teaching within the school. Okay. Idea sharing between colleagues. Now, formal appraisal. Okay, so it gets to the point where observations can be done between peers. They can be friendly observations from a manager observing a newer teacher. We, at some point, need to consider performance appraisal. Does this teacher need a promotion? Do they need a raise? All right, formal appraisal, quality assurance. Okay, is the quality of teaching that's being delivered within the school up to standard? Acknowledging good performance. Okay, remember, I think it's very easy when you're new to observing new teachers to pick out everything that's wrong in their performance. Okay, it's easy to criticize and see what they're not doing well. We also need to use observation as an opportunity to acknowledge what they're doing well. That's equally as important. We don't want our teachers to be demotivated by all the feedback that we're giving them. Okay, action plan for weaker aspects of performance. Okay, so I think these two things go hand in hand. You need to acknowledge what they're doing well, and you need to highlight what can do with improvement. There are various ways we can manage that. We can just tell them, expect them to go off and sort it out themselves. They can go off and do research. They can observe other teachers. They can ask other teachers. And hopefully, you know, any school has that supportive kind of environment where especially the newer teacher feels comfortable to go off and ask their colleagues about how to deal with something in particular. But I also think it's a great opportunity for the manager to provide some direct support to that teacher, especially a newer teacher, even if it's merely in the form of a suggestion. Okay, so it's moving the emphasis away from criticizing towards making suggestions for these teachers. Obviously, we've got this. We need to fulfill our obligations to accrediting or affiliation bodies, such as International House, and any other organizations your school may be affiliated to. And again, from a more business perspective, we need to make sure our stakeholders are kept happy. So whether it's learners, parents, or employers. Okay, so especially newer teachers don't necessarily understand why we do in-service observation. They just see it as a continuation of the painful experiences they had on their CELTA. Okay, and it needn't be that at all. In fact, it shouldn't be that at all. And at the same time, we want teachers to embrace observation as an opportunity to, one, develop themselves, and as managers, we want to embrace in-service observation as an opportunity to improve the quality of teaching in the school, and therefore essentially improve the school as an institute and as a business. All right, so, all right. I think, especially for those that are new to observing in-service teachers, one of the things that really needs to be clarified is what is the difference between in-service observation and training new teachers, for example, on a CELTA course, and also what's the difference between in-service observation and how it's different from further training awards, such as Delta, for example. Okay, so, especially for those newer to observation, I think this will help set you off in the right direction. Okay, so have a look. We'll start with the first one. So focus on training. So essentially, we're looking at something like CELTA, a pre-service course. Okay, the majority of candidates on a CELTA course do not have previous teaching experience. Okay, so essentially, we're training them how to do the job. Okay, they need to develop the skills and the techniques of the job, and we show them on a course like a CELTA. Okay, having said that, that's not always true. Okay, in Dubai, I would say at least 50% of our candidates are experienced teachers. Okay, a lot of them have 10, 20 plus years teaching experience. Some of them have MAs coming out their ears. Okay, and they can tell you all about communicative language teaching. What they don't have is the techniques for applying that in the classroom. And very occasionally, we do let them jump to Delta, very rarely, but on the whole, we get them to do CELTA first, because they need the grounding in the techniques first. Okay, so, but on the whole, the CELTA, for example, was designed as a pre-service course. Okay, so in-service observation is not really focused on training, nor is the Delta or any other in-service qualification. All right, so focus on development. Here, this is where in-service observation comes into effect, as does Delta. Okay, so here we're assuming that they've been trained and they need to develop further as teachers. All right, so this is what, say, something like Delta and in-service observation have in common. Okay, existing teaching skills, yes and yes, for both in-service observation and Delta. We're not assuming that they have these for a pre-service course, even though they may. Remember, the course was designed for people without this. And the same goes for prior teaching knowledge. Okay, boom, boom. A lot of the candidates we have in Dubai have a huge amount of this. Okay, an immense amount. We have people who have 2 or 3 MAs come to us, or PhDs in linguistics. So the incredible amount of language awareness, for example, or awareness of different teaching methodologies, they have very little of this. They're great lecturers. They're good at standing there and explaining things to students. And, you know, well, depending on your student's background, sometimes that works for a lot of students. Yeah? All right, high stakes. Okay, CELTA, Delta, for example. Why? These candidates are paying a lot of money to do a course, and it's a course that they can pass or fail. So essentially, that could be £1,000, £2,000, £3,000 that they're throwing away if they don't manage to meet the requirements of the program. Okay, in-service observation is not high stakes. Okay, no one's really going to lose their job because their observation didn't go so well. Okay. All right, quality assurance. Again, the focus of pre- and in-service courses is not to standardize the quality of teaching within the institute, whereas in-service observation, it is. Similarly, with actual appraisal, okay, does this teacher need a raise? Do they need to be promoted? Do they need to be given additional things to do within the institute? That does not come from either of these programs. Okay, criterion referenced. Both CELTA and Delta, for example, along with a whole horde of other actual courses and qualifications, are criterion referenced. You need to demonstrate X, Y, Z. Okay? Now, some schools will actually have, you'll be able to tick this box here. Some schools do have a set of criteria for their in-service observations. I think you need to be careful with your selection of criteria here, because I think it can make it very similar to this type of training. Remember, with in-service observation, we're not talking about training, we're talking about development and quality assurance. Okay, and obviously with something like Delta, you're also focusing on research. The candidates I mentioned take their knowledge, existing knowledge and skills, and go off and research whatever chosen area they've decided to work on. All right, so I hope that kind of puts things in place a bit more in terms of what we're looking for with this type of observation. So focus on development, existing teaching skills. We've got to assume that they already have some, and some prior teaching knowledge, and we're looking for quality assurance and performance appraisal. All right. I think one of the problems of an in-service observation program is that it tends to be too top-down in approach, okay? And the teachers themselves aren't necessarily very much involved in the process. I think one way around that is to explore, different aspects of it. I think most schools will have some form of this, formal appraisal by either a manager or a senior teacher, as the case may be. As any good teacher of communicative language teaching knows, learners learn so much by interacting with each other. And the same goes for teachers. Getting teachers to observe each other is can be a huge learning curve, especially for newer teachers, to observe more experienced ones, but also maybe for the more experienced, the old wise ones, maybe get to see learn a lot from the newer teachers as well. Okay, it also means a lot of the work that you might do here can be done at this phase. Yeah. So for those of you involved in observation, or at least in your schools, how many of you have a peer-to-peer observation system? All right. Okay. So not quite, about 3/4 of you put your hand up then. I think it's a really useful learning tool for teachers. And it extends the idea of collegiality and idea sharing, okay, self-evaluation. Now, I mean, that could be managed in very different ways. It can be an evaluation of the same lesson that the manager observed. Maybe, I know schools that have set teachers 3 or 4 self-evaluation tasks that they have to complete per year. So again, it becomes more of a reflective journal, if you like, of their progress at strategic points over the year. And I know teachers who have kept a journal right throughout their whole earlier stages of their teaching career as well. Okay. All right. Now, I also know part of what we do at IHWI is working with schools, so primary schools, secondary schools, as well as the tertiary sector. And I recently delivered some presentations to teachers in the Emirate excuse me, of Abu Dhabi. And what I wanted them to do was to come up with a process for managing performance appraisal and observation. Now, so I set them their task like a good teacher and let them do it for a while, and I monitored and gave them feedback. And their perspectives of observation was very interesting. And essentially, they tended to think of observation as a way of testing the teacher, Okay. Now, I think this is something that we need to be careful of as managers. You know, we've worked our way up to this position. We probably, hopefully, all teach very well. And now that we've moved into our management positions, and one of the things that is our responsibility is to observe in-service teachers. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's the easiest thing in the world to tell someone everything that they did wrong, to see everything that's wrong with their performance, or what they're not doing well, or what they're not doing. And of course, we need to weigh that up. And we want to encourage our teachers not to be scared of this process of observation, but embrace it as, you know, an opportunity for growth and professional development, rather than something for being tested on. Now, I mean, I'm sure we've all been observed an incredible amount of times in our teaching careers. I don't think anyone particularly likes being observed, but I think one of the things we can do as managers is to facilitate a better understanding of the observation process and what a teacher can get out of it, okay, and move away from this model of testing the teacher. So much so that a number of I had representatives from about 50 different schools in Abu Dhabi and then another 50 schools in Al Ain. And a number of these schools have what they call on-the-spot observations. So the teacher will just, a manager will just turn up one day, walk into the classroom and sit down and observe what's going on. Now, there are arguments for and against this type of observation. Personally, I'm not in favor of it at all. I get some of the arguments for it, but personally I think it's quite confrontational, and often the teacher, you know, I feel a bit threatened by that kind of unexpected drop in observation. I think the better way of managing it is to let a teacher know, okay, at some point in this week, I'm going to drop in. I'm not sure when yet, but just know that will happen, and to not freak out when I walk in the room. Personally, I'm much more of a fan of the approach whereby the observation is much more collaborative. The manager interacts with the teacher before the lesson, during the planning stage, and there's collaboration as to what's going to be observed, what is the focus of the observation, what does the teacher want to be focused on, and so on and so forth. I know other models where the management has said, okay, everyone's going to be observed this week, and we're only looking at one particular thing. So it could just be, I don't know, classroom management, or warmers was another one. So everyone knew that they only had to focus on that one thing for that particular observation. So I think making the purpose a lot more transparent to the teachers means they're going to embrace the opportunity a lot more readily and be less freaked out about it. There's also the issue of frequency of observations. Now, typically, newer teachers are going to be observed more frequently than more experienced ones. But again, like I said earlier, I think the experienced ones can learn just as much from observing a newer teacher as the new ones observing the more experienced ones. All right. I think there are a whole lot of problems involved with trying to implement a good performance management and observation scheme. I've got some of the problems up here. Okay, so what I want you to do is what? Can you guess? Okay, so yeah, in groups of 3 or 4, whatever works out, in your groups, discuss solutions to these potential problems. Yeah? Okay, heard some really interesting feedback from all of you regarding some of your solutions for these. So I wanted to spend a bit more time going over some potential solutions because I heard some really good suggestions. Okay, so let's go through them. First one up there. Teachers not clear the value or impact of observation. Any thoughts about that? Yes? Yes. Mm.
Subjective, and you could also then have developmental
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. I'm a big fan of having at least 2 observations per year, one of which will be more developmental and the other will be more performance appraisal orientated. Again, it's only fair, like when we're working with, we train our candidates on training courses when they're dealing with learners, let them know what is expected of them. Okay? I think that's only fair. Yeah?
I think the other problems impact this as well, though, because even I think as a school we try to show the teachers the value. It's written in the handbook, it's during induction, the managers are very supportive, but if the other problems are causing things like nerves or their own feelings,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter how much we try and show
Right.
value, there are all these other...
Right. All these other effective things interfering with, oh, I know it's good for me, but I'm still scared to death. Sure. Yes.
The other problem is you need to have the school is very clear where it's coming, what they want from the observation, but also the other side that the management team and everyone is involved in getting rid of those problems and creating an atmosphere that's conducive.
Exactly. I think you deal with affective problems with affective solutions. So what can you actively do to make them feel more comfortable with the process? And I think as we go through some solutions to these other ones, I think those solutions will impact on this problem. But yes, I also like what you mentioned about having it in a handbook. Now, at all your centres, how many of you have the observation process spelt out in a handbook? Okay, so maybe half of you, yeah? I think it's a really good point. And make sure you're stating in that. I mean, don't just say, oh, you will be observed twice in this year by your manager. Okay, that's not really spelling out the observation process. Spell out the value of it and talk about how it will be a collaborative process or not, depending on whatever process you want to implement in your school. All right, good. So let's move on. Teachers not familiar with expectations or criteria. Yeah.
Well, we thought we could actually perhaps get the teachers involved in the observation system. Maybe,
Yes.
In a teachers meeting, sort of have a brainstorm. What do you think would be important when you're doing peer observations? What do you think is important for a management observation? And actually get the teachers to come up with these things, which may be quite useful and quite could be things that you hadn't thought of yourself.
Yeah, very much so. I think that's a great way of also dealing with this issue. The next one, teachers not involved. Get them involved in the process. Okay, it's a bit like coming up with a class contract with learners. Get them to come up with what the focus of observation will be and collectively to decide on that. Again, if you do have if it is more appraisal orientated, again, let them know what the expectations are for that. Okay, let them know, especially the newer teachers who may be new to your school, give them a copy of what the feedback sheet will look like. Discuss that feedback sheet before they start planning the lesson, or at least before they deliver it, so they are aware of the expectations. Yeah.
Personally, for my something I found to work very well is make sure you manage expectations from day one. It's what joins your organisation. Then it shouldn't come as a surprise later on. Very much almost like a sales process in a way. You're trying to close the door because there's an opportunity for them to open it. And I find that by letting them know on day one, from the time they interview, this is part of the quality assurance that we do. We will observe, this is the kind of thing, and this is why we do it, for the value of the organisation. I find they're less resistant to it further down the line. When you say, okay, here comes your first observation, I was expecting it more relaxed.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, again, let them know. I think expectation management is key here. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just talking about going back to this feedback thing. I think observations is important, but the way feedback is conducted is equally as important in terms of the impact and the value. Yeah. So, but a lot of us are not trained in how to give feedback after the observation. So, having the phrasing correct or having the approach, done in a correct manner, so that it's received as something positive instead of something.
Good. I think this is particularly valid for those of us who are not trained teacher trainers. However, I still think in a lot of ways the nature of in-service observation is quite different towards training on an actual course, and therefore I think the feedback can be very different to the feedback you would give on an actual training course. When I deliver CELTA or Delta feedback, I never ask the question, how do you feel about your lesson? Or how do you think that went? Massive can of worms, that one. And of course, when I started out, that was the first thing I always asked, how did you feel about that? You're like, oh, yeah. It's a bit like asking students, what did you do on the weekend? On a Monday morning. It's like, oh, soon get rid of that one after a year of teaching, don't you? Whereas I'm quite happy to do that on an in-service observation. Okay, it can be more of more of an interaction, and less transactional in orientation, and more of a discussion. So I usually do. How did you feel about that? I also think that you can know the feedback if you decide what the focus of the observation is going to be before the lesson, and you collaborate on what that focus will be. That determines what you're going to give feedback on. You don't need to talk about everything. Talk about what the focus of the observation was. Now, excuse me. It may be that you've decided that everyone in the whole school is going to be focused on one particular thing for the next observation. It may not be. It may be that each individual teacher is going to decide or collaborate with their manager as to what the focus of the observation will be. Either way, if they know what's expected of them, you, as the observer, kind of know what's expected of you in terms of the feedback you give. I also think, don't be afraid to ask any other senior teachers or management in the school who may be more experienced at giving feedback. Great. Yes. That's great. I mean, it's definitely worth checking that. I haven't seen it myself. I mean, I've heard about it, but I'm sure it's great. And I know about a year or two, someone sent around something on the CELTA list thingy, which is loads and loads of different feedback techniques. I haven't been able to track that down, but if you research it, it is out there. And I don't know, maybe that's something I can do my next presentation on, feedback. All right. Okay, so this next one, I think everything we've just said relates to this one. Get them involved in it. So whether it's collaborative, collaborate as to what the focus of the observation will be. Get them involved in peer-to-peer observation as well, and self-evaluation as well. The more familiar they become with the different aspects and different processes involved with it, the more I think they're going to take their own professional development into their own hands. Okay, not familiar with it? I think spell it out. Okay, spell it out in a handbook. Okay, and I also think, this point you made earlier about make that clear from the start. I'm sure all schools have had some new teachers slip through the net in terms of going through a rigorous orientation. Okay, we're guilty of it in Dubai as well. Teachers have come in with, forgotten to tell them things. They don't know where the pens are, or may have not been as rigorous as we could have been in terms of, spelling out what the purpose of observation is and how we go about doing it. Okay, so put it in a handbook, spell it out to them, and that's certainly a discussion you should have with them when they're newly recruited. Okay. Okay, observation process 2, top down. I guess nothing really I haven't said earlier. Get them involved in peer-to-peer observation and self-evaluation. So again, it's not just a manager observing them, and it's not always appraisal orientated. I mean, observations can be developmental, and this is part of the reasoning by having, if you have 2 observations a year, one can be developmental and the other can be more appraisal orientated. But also remember, observation is only one aspect of performance appraisal. There's a lot more to the job than just what goes on in an observed lesson. Okay. Teacher's nerves. No. Manager. Too heavy-handed. And again, this comes back to something I mentioned earlier. It's very easy, especially if you're new to observation, to be more critical than what you need to be. So, solutions for this one? Or do you all believe in being heavy-handed? Emily?
Well, I had a teacher who kind of linked in with the nerves. She was quite nervous about being observed, etc. So the first time I observed her, I just praised everything that she did. Excellent.
Okay.
Really nice. Thank you. That was brilliant. Yeah. And then gradually, you know, the next observation, a little bit of constructive criticism. And it's got to the point now where when I asked her what she wanted to be observed on for her last observation, she chose her most difficult class because she knew that she would get the support that she needed because I'd gone in with a very, very softly approach.
Yeah. Good. I think it's a great idea. Again, it's that issue of manage affective problems with affective solutions. You know, at the end of the day, she's developing, the performance is improving, and the quality of teaching in the school is improving. And that, at the end of the day, is why we're doing it. Yeah. More suggestions? I
think it really benefits to be too heavy-handed because especially certain nationalities don't take too well to being told that they might have done something wrong, especially if they've got these 2 MAs and a B.Ed and what have you, and they've got 24 years experience, and basically you can't tell them. So you don't really gain anything by being heavy-handed. You probably get negative response.
Yes, yeah. I think it's very true. I mean, Karima and I are both used to working with people from our region, which is Middle East and South Asia, and you know, and again, that's something that we would have both had to learn when we go to that area of the world. I mean, you can't come charging in on your European TEFL high horse and expect to work with these, Arab and South Asian teachers who have 12 MAs and 9,000 years teaching experience and believe they know it all.
There's an important thing that you have to maintain your integrity. When
Yes.
you talk about telling someone they've done something wrong, you should never fear that. What you should, I think, really do is look at the way to tell them that's going to suit their personality, because if you just praise everything they do and forget to tell them what they have done wrong, what's the point of the observation, really? At the end of the day, there's no development.
I think this is where providing suggestions is really important. And if it needs to be well, why didn't you do it like this? Because then you would have this result, or you would have a better result if you did this. That may be your way around it. On the other hand, I mean, there are candidates who are more than happy to take a bit of a beating. Like, tell me everything I did wrong. Bring it on. It's great. You can go to town with them. Like,
What I do sometimes is 2 columns, one's for strengths and one's for areas.
Of course.
To consider, areas to consider. And then I try to make it sort of even. If it's too heavy on one side, I try to look for a few more good points. So somewhere there,
Good.
Just try to find a few more strengths that they have.
That's right. I mean, but balance it out. Be balanced. The last thing I'll give out to you is a handout just of some of the points we've covered today. I've got some suggested solutions to these problems. One we didn't touch on, teachers' nerves. I think the key to this is to do everything else. If they know what they're in for, if they know what their expectations are, and they're much more likely to be a bit more relaxed about it, and also just be nice. Yeah? Be nice to them. Don't hurt them. Okay? Especially if they're young. Emily's squirming in the corner there. It's like, nice to the teachers. What is this? Play school. Yeah, remember, it's the easiest thing in the world to criticize and be overly negative. Weigh that up and balance that out with positive reinforcement. I think a lot of observation is determined by a SALTer-type observation, and I think the majority of SALTer tutors are very much focused on, got to do this, got to do that, got to do that, got to ICQ, got to CCQ, do this, do that. And I think the reason why it's like that is because we're training them in teaching skills. So in order to develop the school, you've got to do it in every single lesson. Instruction check everything, okay, drill everything, concept check everything. Well, no, that's not really how you teach. But in order for them to develop the skill, we need to see them do it and give them feedback on it. I think once it comes to in-service observation, I think you need to be more relaxed about that, yeah? Okay, last comment, because we do got to stop.
Sorry, just a quick one then. Because how much is too much and how much, sort of heavy-handed kind of thing, but then also, do you let the teachers go back and reflect on the lesson and then say like... What
Yeah, always. I think what goes on before and after the actual observation of the lesson is just as important. So talk about the lesson beforehand, and of course, talk about it afterwards.
Because I usually let them,
Let them hand in a self-evaluation,
yes.
and then discuss it.
And then for points that they brought up, and especially for the strength and weaknesses, if it's mentioned and it sort of reflects on what I've observed, I don't bring that up. Because especially if they recognize that it is a weakness and they can't.
You still might want to talk about that, especially if it was a good point.
So,
Yeah.
so a bit of time.
I think there's no rule, there's no black or white rule about that. Yeah. Okay, we've got to stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.